Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we'll discuss 7 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. From your analysis section, in the first topic, we'll try to provide an in-depth analysis of India's Act East policy and its importance in the current geopolitical environment. Then, in the second topic, we'll try to assess that how the mitigation of sulfur dioxide from the coal power plants can lead to significant reduction in cardiovascular diseases. Then, from your prelims pointer, we'll take up 5 news, where we will not only try to simplify the news for you, but also provide very important value addition, keeping in mind the approaching prelims 2026. So, stay tuned. The Prime Minister remarked that Vietnam is a central pillar to the larger fulcrum of India's Act East policy as well as the Vision Mahasagar to ensure stability and the economic development in the region. The India's Act East policy and the ASEAN countries, Association for Southeast Asian Nation, forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the larger theme of the groupings which actually affect India's interest. So first try to assess the context of the news. India's relation with Vietnam is a partnership that does not aim at any other country, specifically in the Indo-Pacific region, and that was the official statement which was given by the Ministry of External Affairs. The remarks came soon after India welcomed the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam's Central Committee To Lam, who is also the current Vietnamese president. So while our Prime Minister was hosting the Vietnamese President at the Indian Council of World Affairs, whose summit is taking place at New Delhi, he remarked that how Vietnam is a major pillar of our country's Act East policy as well as the vision of Mahasagar, which includes the larger Indo-Pacific region. So in this context, let's first try to assess our relationship with the country Vietnam. Vietnam, which got its independence from the colonial rule of France in the year of 1954, and under the leadership of a very prominent ruler whose name was Ho Chi Minh. And in the very same year, in the year of 1954 itself, our country's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, actually became the first official representative of any other country to visit Vietnam, thus officially recognizing the status of Vietnam as an independent country. That was also recognized by the Vietnamese president. However, we established our official diplomatic relations with the region of Vietnam in the year of 1972, and then we transitioned it to a kind of a comprehensive strategic partnership in the year of 2016. As per the today's Hindu article itself, our trade with Vietnam has touched to almost $16 billion in the year of 2025, and the aim is to further enhance it to $25 billion by the year of 2030. However, keep this in mind that even with the country like Vietnam, we are actually incurring a trade deficit. So, we almost import the goods and the commodities and various kind of services worth $10 billion, majorly various kind of electronics, machinery, which includes your various kind of semiconductors as well as chemicals. Keep this in mind that even though Vietnam might be appearing as a very small country on the map, it has very large reserves for several important critical minerals like, for example, copper, bauxite, titanium. We almost import 50% of our titanium need from China. So in that case also Vietnam is very important. For what? It is key for our country's energy security, critical mineral supply, as well as rare earth, which are actually required, right, in very much high need for our semiconductor industry. So, to further enhance this trade which is taking place, very recently there is a memorandum of understanding which has been signed with the Reserve Bank of India and the Central Bank of Vietnam to actually further facilitate digital payments between both the countries. So, when we have understood the trade relations with Vietnam, try to understand this, it is a central pillar as per our Honorable Prime Minister of what? Of Association for Southeast Asian Nation. The first question which shall be coming in your mind is what constitutes ASEAN? ASEAN is basically a grouping of 11 members which was originally formed through the Bangkok Declaration in the year of 1967 by the big 5 countries. Who are these big 5 countries? There is your Philippines, there is your Singapore, your Malaysia, Indonesia, as well as, if you guys can see on the map, there is your Thailand. So these five major countries, right, the big five countries actually signed up a declaration called as Bangkok Declaration in the year of 1967, and the aim was to actually adhere to the United Nations Charter and thus promote regional cooperation as well as economic development. Currently, there are 11 countries which forms the part of Asia. Keep this in mind. The recent country which has been included in the list is Timor-Leste, right? While Papua New Guinea basically act as a kind of an observer at ASEAN. The first summit of ASEAN in the year of 1967 took place at Bali, Indonesia, and its headquarters is also located in Indonesia at a place called as Jakarta. Why this ASEAN is so much important for us? Keep this in mind that let's say for example, we have a population of 1.4 billion people. But at the same time, we have also launched various initiatives to boost indigenous production in our country of various commodities. There is a large scale service sector which exists in our country. So if we want a kind of a profound development of both of this manufacturing and service sector in our country, don't you think we need to generate demand for our products in other parts of the world as well, so that we can effectively transition this Make in India to Make for World initiative? For that purpose, this ASEAN actually act as a kind of a very lucrative market, considering it has a GDP of worth around $13 trillion, that is almost 6.5% of the world's GDP, and currently act as the world's fourth largest economy together, all of these 11 nations, and it is going to become the fourth largest economy by the year of 2030. Thus, don't you think that the people who are residing in Southeast Asian nations, they actually have a great propensity to consume? And if they get good quality, cheap products being manufactured from India, we are also just an ocean apart from these nations. So while we say that our largest amount of commodities are actually going to European Union or USA, don't you think there are a lot of logistical constraints which we actually face? Why? Because of the huge distance which prevails. But in the case of Southeast Asian nation, where there exists such a lucrative market, we are just an ocean apart. And thus, you keep this in mind that we are also developing this great Nicobar, kind of a transition port at the just on the mouth of Strait of Malacca. So our trade with Asia nations can actually significantly boost up. Keep this in mind. It is also important for us. Why? Because this Strait of Malacca which we are discussing, it just sits as a kind of a connecting dot between your larger Indian Ocean, right, or Andaman Sea, as to its left, and towards its right there exists your South China Sea. So basically this Strait of Malacca, which is largely controlled by the Southeast Asian nations, it basically acts as a kind of a gateway for our country to the larger Pacific market. And this larger Indo-Pacific market, keep this in mind, consists of 65% of the world's population and almost 60% of the world's GDP. It basically leads to 46% of the world's merchandise trade which takes place, as well as 55% of the container shipment trade as well. ASEAN also has a huge market for Indian products. For example, it has more than 650 million population, and thus for our country it basically acts as the third largest market after USA and European Union. Also, several countries of these ASEAN also invest a huge amount of forex reserves in our country. For example, just look at the infographic here. Which country has the largest share of investment in our country? The largest provider of foreign direct investment. It is none other than Singapore. If you guys can see here, Mauritius and USA are close second and third, right? So with this reason, our bilateral trade has also significantly increased up to $130 billion in the fiscal year of 24-25, right? Just to simplify it for you, let's say you have two uncles. There is one uncle who gives you a lot of blessing to clear this examination. And then there is another uncle who basically keeps on adding some money to your pocket money. Which uncle is going to be more dear to you, more favorite of you? Just like the relations which we see around us, the geopolitical relations at the international level, they are also guided by this economic angle. So these five facts very clearly establish that how this specific region of the ASEAN holds a kind of a paramount importance from the economic perspective of our country. Similarly, when we are actually trying to sell our products, let's say for example to the region of ASEAN, there is a lot of kind of a dominance which prevails in this region by China. So keep this in mind that this total trade which we do with ASEAN, it only forms 11% of total India's trade. However, in sharp contrast to that, China is the largest trading partner of the ASEAN. At the same point of time, there are various countries which has actually joined the Belt and Road Initiative of China, a huge infrastructure investment which China is making in this region, and thus also kind of following the debt trap policy. So for example, various countries, your Indonesia, Cambodia, your Vietnam, with which we were discussing our trade relation, all of them has actually joined this region of Belt and Road Initiative. Then very recently, if you guys are following the newspaper, you guys have understood two important things. First is, if it comes to oil, for our oil need, India is almost 87 to 88% import dependent, right? We do not have enough amount of oil reserves in our country. The second is that you guys are very well aware about the LPG crisis which is taking place. So for example, in our country, there exists two important strategic reserves of LPG. One is at Vishakhapatnam and one is at Mangalore. The total capacity of these two LPG reserves in our country amounts to approximately 1.5 lakh ton of LPG, right? Seems like a good number. However, keep this in mind that our daily need of LPG itself is 80,000 ton. Thus, these two LPG reserves which we have, strategic reserves, they hold the capacity to provide LPG in the kind of a case of a crisis or in the case of a shortage only for maximum period of 2 days. That's all. So don't you think that in this region of Indo-Pacific, in Indian Ocean, around Strait of Malacca, in this larger exclusive economic zone which our country has, we can actually kind of try to create cordial relationship with these Asian countries, seek their technological investments, seek their financial investments. For what? For various kind of offshore energy cooperation and exploration in the Indo-Pacific region. Similarly, to further boost our economy, we can collaborate with these countries in the sphere of digital economy to actually kind of fund various startups through these foreign direct investment, as well as to create a kind of a quantum key distribution technology system for various securing our cyberspace. At the same point of time, to further enhance these relations with these Asian nations, India basically acts as a kind of a net security provider in the region of Indo-Pacific, where we launch various kind of humanitarian assistance to provide disaster relief, or for example, various search and rescue operations in the region. Also, we provide various kind of funds in the times of peril to these countries. Like for example, you guys can recall that how India has launched a coalition for disaster resilience infrastructure initiative along with Japan. And under this very same initiative, when there was a earthquake which took place in Myanmar in 2025, our country had launched a very significant mission called as Operation Brahma, where we provided various kind of relief measures, various kind of funds and grants to these countries on the east of us, right? Thus, the Asian nations, which basically act as a gateway for our country to the larger and the lucrative market of the Indo-Pacific region. That is something which we have tried to establish, right? Now, what is this India's Act East policy? To actually take significant measures to strengthen our relations with Asian nations. First and foremost, it is much more ambitious and updated version of the Look East policy which we had with 1991. So this Act East policy basically worked upon four important C's, which you guys shall remember. One is culture, one is commerce, one is to further enhance our connectivity with the region, and the further is capacity building. So the commerce perspective has been established here, the kind of trade which we are having, the various initiatives which we are taking basically to kind of further enhance our trade with the region of Asia. Now let's try to assess the culture and the capacity building part here. So for example, in year of 2025 was actually declared as the Asian India Year of Tourism, for which our country also committed $5 million. Keep this in mind that for the first time, if you guys can recall, a very interesting fact for all of you. When we say Cambodia, Cambodia is nothing but a vulgarized pronunciation of a Sanskrit word that is Kamboja. Kamboja basically in Sanskrit means something which is of conch shell shape. So for example, if you guys will look at the map of Cambodia, you guys will find out that how it actually looked like a conch shell. So why it is named on a term which is actually Sanskrit in its origin? Because in the year of 802 C, right, just 2 years after the establishment of the Holy Roman Empire in the Europe, just 2 years down the line, there was a king. The name of the king was Jayavarman. Jayavarman is considered to have linkages with the Pallava dynasty, which was ruling the region of South India, Tamil Nadu at that point of a time. Jayavarman basically migrated with large-scale boats and military and established an empire called as Khmer Empire in the region of Cambodia. Now, keep this in mind that our country is considered to be the origin of two important religious sects, that is Buddhism and Hinduism. However, a very interesting fact for all of you, the largest Buddhist and Hindu temple are not found in our country. Rather, they are actually found in Angkor Wat of Cambodia, which was actually created by the successor of Jayavarman, whose name was Suryavarman. So we already have a large scale cultural relationship prevailing centuries with the Asian nations. Thus, we can actually, kind of integrate these cultural factors and enhance our trade with the region. Also, we are trying to double the Asian students to the Nalanda University, right? Nalanda University, which was established in 427 C by a Gupta ruler whose name was Kumar Gupta. And at that point of a time, it was used to be considered as the Oxford of East. The people or the students from various parts of the even Southeast Asian nation, like for example, your Cambodia or Kamboja or Champa. Champa was the ancient name of Vietnam. The students used to come here, flock here for studies. We have also created an Asian India Fund for Digital Future of 2024. And to further, kind of create the concept of blue economy and further develop it, we are launching various kind of human assistance in the disaster relief missions, search and rescue missions. And we are also trying to, kind of cooperate with these countries to combat the illegal, unregulated and unreported fishing which takes place in this region of Indo-Pacific. So these are our various cultural and capacity building initiatives which we have launched. What we have done in the sphere of connectivity, another important C. First is your India, Myanmar, Thailand trilateral road highway which has been created. So it starts from your More Tamu in India, goes to Mandalay, Bago, right, very near to the Yangon River in Myanmar, and then ultimately ends at Thailand. So it has further increased the road connectivity with the Southeast Asian nation of Thailand. Similarly, there is a India-Myanmar, right, kind of a initiative for the development of a port. Port is called as Kaladan multi-modal port, which you guys can see here. This same region of Kaladan, Sitwe was originally captured by the British in the year of 1824 in the first Anglo-Burma war which took place. And at that point of a time, the Governor General of Bengal was your Lord Amherst. However, the person who actually fought the battle and defeated the Burmese king at that point of a time, leading to the annexation of this entire region of Myanmar, Sitwe, Kaladan, etc. That person was Colin Campbell, right? If UPSC asks you, who was the Governor General of India, who led to the entire annexation of Burma in the year of 1880-85, right? Obviously, there might be some duffer person to do that, and that was Dufferin. And remember that Burma or Myanmar was actually secluded from India by the act which is Government of India Act 1935. So we have also covered the historical backdrop of it. Okay? This is our India's Act East policy. While we are actually trying to develop our relations, keep this in mind that there are several challenges also which we are facing. The first and foremost is the huge trade imbalance we have. So when we were discussing that how our trade with this region has actually reached up to $130 billion, it seems very good on the paper. However, the reality hits different. For example, look at this table which we have borrowed from the Director General of Foreign Trade, according to which the total export which we did to these Asian nations between the year of 24 to 25 was approximately $38 billion, right? However, the import which we are having with these regions actually amounts to $84 billion, and thus in total we are actually incurring a trade deficit of $46 billion. So keep this in mind that as per the Director General of Foreign Trade itself, if we look from the year of 2011 to 2025, in the span of 14 years, our export has significantly increased by 1.7 times with these Asian nations, right? However, in the very same time period, our trade deficit with the same region has increased by 8.7 times. So instead of actually promoting the idea of Make in India and production linked incentive scheme to further create industrialization in our country and create products for these economies, we are actually buying or importing more commodities and services from these countries, right? Completely antithetical to the idea of Make in India itself. So that is the first issue of trade imbalance. This trade imbalance basically arises from two issues. First is the rising manufacturing competitiveness with these countries like, for example, Vietnam. For that purpose, we have borrowed the data which has been provided to us, right, by the Global Trade Research Institute. It shows you that how the world textile export between the 2013 to 2023, it actually increased by 11.4%. While India's export during the same period only increased by a meager 6.2%. That is almost half to the global increase which has been registered. Now in this context, let's try to compare ourselves with the nations like Bangladesh and Vietnam, where there also exists a small scale handicraft textile industry, which actually provides a large scale employment to semi-skilled laborers who are actually working on various kind of cheap wages. Thus, the quality which is being produced is obviously of it is a good quality, right? Decent quality, but at the same point of time, the input cost is very less. And thus these industries are actually acting or providing a large scale competition to our textile industry. For example, just look at the percentage of growth in the textile export. 67% growth was registered between 2013 to 2023 by the country that is Bangladesh. 96% growth was actually registered by the country that is Vietnam. And now in comparison to that, look at the India's total growth which we have registered. The major reason for that is that these two countries, they basically identify themselves as the least developed nations. So when they take their product to European Union, to USA's market, these countries do not charge any tariff on them. However, you guys know that how there is a large scale tariff imposition which is being done on Indian products, right, by USA, which earlier had imposed almost 50% tariff on various Indian products. Or for example, the trade protectionist measure which has been taken by European nations in the form of carbon border adjustment mechanism. So don't you think all of this is actually deterring our trade in comparison to these countries? The second is the tariff asymmetry. So to further enhance and boost our trade with the region, what we did, we basically reduced almost tariff on the various products which we were importing from ASEAN, almost 74% of the product. However, this trade relations has not been reciprocal in the nature, where the Asian nations has reduced tariff on a meager 56% products of India. Then we could have ended up signing a kind of a free trade agreement called as Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, which actually came into fruition in the year of 2020, considered to be the world's largest free trade area, where these Asian nations were actually joined by other countries to create a kind of a free trade economic bloc, like with countries like China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, etc. Even India was the part of negotiation which was taking place from the year of 2013. However, there were various kind of apprehensions which we had with Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. The first was that the items related to which the governments was really worried, like for example in the agriculture sector. So for example, in agriculture sector and allied activities, the dairy sector is one of the most prominent contributor to the income of the farmers in our country. What if the cheap dairy products from the region of Australia and New Zealand would have started infiltrating our markets? Don't you think that would have acted detrimental to our country's farmers' income? Or various import of industrial goods like auto parts, white goods, footwear, etc. Electronic goods like mobile phones, telecom equipments, consumer, various kind of electronics. All of this would have significantly dented the idea of Make in India, and that's why our country basically refrained from joining this free trade agreement of Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Keep this in mind that because we did not join it, we ended up losing on almost a bloc which consists of 30% of the GDP of the world and almost 30% of the population of the world as well. Then in this reason, the various kind of these connectivity projects which we have launched and seems very kind of attractive on the map as well, they have not actually kind of transition into the reality because of the various bureaucratic bottlenecks which exist, and thus there has taken place a slow progress in these connectivity projects. Then what China is doing? So when India is actually trying to kind of infiltrate the markets to actually kind of increase the sea-based trade, container-based trade in the region, China has come with the wolf warrior diplomacy, where it has said that it has an ancient claim on the South China Sea under a 9-dash line. Under a 9-dash line, China basically claims 90% of the South China Sea as its own exclusive economic zone. And this basically hinders with various other countries' exclusive economic zone or have a kind of an overlapping claim. Like for example, Vietnam, Malaysia, your countries like Philippines. So all of these countries, right, are apprehensive of the kind of the China's dominance in the South China Sea. Then, very recently, one of the secretaries working in the Ministry of External Affairs commented in the Hindu that how when it comes to the Indo-Pacific strategy, while India's aim is to basically bring all the countries together and kind of focus upon the holistic development, the Asian nations are very selectively focusing on their own growth. So these are the challenges which are basically hindering our cooperation as we have established. Keep this data very dear to you whenever you people are writing the answer. Now comes the question how to avoid such frictions. What can be way forward? The first and foremost is to actually focus upon the 4 C's which we are discussing under your Saga doctrine. To further focus upon the cultural development, to create more people-to-people connection, to actually create more capacity building. If let's say for example there has taken place some technological development in the region of Asian nation, we can actually create a kind of a student exchange program, bring those technologies in our nation, try to implement them at the grassroots level. Then we should start negotiating instead of this entire regional comprehensive economic agreement. We can actually start renegotiating free trade agreement with individual countries of Asian nation. And in that, we can actually be much more, kind of focused upon our country's interest, specifically the interest of the farmers. The second is to further incentivize the small scale industries in our country so that we should start creating the products for the world to actually transition make in India to make for world, because there are a lot of countries which because of this huge dominance of China and the huge infiltration of China's in the geopolitical relations, a lot of countries are following a strategy called as China plus one strategy, where they are basically trying to diversify their supply chain of various commodities to other nations, where we can basically become or emerge as a kind of an alternative. Then we can further fast track connectivity projects for further economic integration. For that purpose, we need a huge infrastructure development first in our northeast Indian region. The government is basically focusing on that, putting impetus on that. Dimapur-Jujba rail project in Nagaland, Asian Highway 1, Assam to More via Kohima and Imphal, Agartala-Akhora rail project between India and Bangladesh. India-Japan Act East Forum also decided to provide a huge kind of infrastructure investment in the Asian region to further co-develop critical and emerging technologies. And in the words of Henry Kissinger, ASEAN is both an economic opportunity as well as a geopolitical necessity to actually balance the Asian power dynamics in the region, specifically with China. So when you people are attempting these questions, a ready-made conclusions has been provided to you which can actually act as a template for conclusion writing, where you can provide a very balanced conclusion. For example, India and ASEAN should also prioritize service trade. The two sides have inked ASEAN-India Trade in Services Agreement in 2014. However, India has not adequately explored the opportunities in the Asian IT sector despite its dominant global role. So in addition, India shall also be able to offer professional and business services to various countries in the ASEAN, where we are not being overtly critical and we are not also praising the initiatives of the government, and thus kind of taking a Madhya Marg approach. Keep these points in your mind and we move forward to the next news, where the article highlights the challenges and the opportunities of controlling sulfur dioxide emission, which contributes to the particulate matter of micron size of 2.5 pollution in the country. The issue which forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the larger theme of environment conservation. So let's first try to understand why this urgent call for structural reform has been made. The reason for that is because there has been a study which has been published by the IIT Delhi, which basically says that how these coal-fired thermal power plants which we have in our country, they end up emitting atmospheric sulfur dioxide, that is SO2. And this SO2, right, as per the study, actually leads to the production of various particulate matters, right? So this sulfur dioxide actually ends up producing various kind of primary pollutants and secondary pollutants. The pollutants which actually poses various kind of health risk. So kind of the majority of such pollutants which are produced, they include sulfate, nitrate and ammonium aerosols. So let's first try to understand what is the difference between primary pollutant and a secondary pollutant. For that purpose, let's first take up an example that there is a smoke which is rising from a thermal power plant, right? Thermal power plant, we can basically say, let's say Vindhyachal thermal power plant. Keep this in mind. It has the largest installed capacity of any thermal power plant in our country. Then let's say there is further smoke which is rising, right, from the exhaust of the automobile, which is running from the fossil fuels like diesel and petrol. Or let's say there is a farmer who in the region of Punjab and Haryana who is basically burning the organic matter, right, of the crop residue of the harvested crop which has taken place, and all of this is basically releasing various kind of smoke, soot, ashes, etc., which basically consist of your primary pollutants, like for example carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxide, sulfur oxide, various volatile organic compounds, your lead, as well as the particulate matter of the micron size of 2.5 and 10. So when these primary pollutants, right, they start rising up, right, up and above in the atmosphere, they actually face various kind of reactions between other gases or water vapor. And thus, this reaction with primary pollutants and other gases or water vapor actually leads to the formation of a much more complex particles which are now termed as secondary pollutants, like for example your ozone, sulfuric and nitric acid. So one year UPSC basically asked a very difficult question. They asked that acid rain is caused by which of the following? The answer was sulfuric and nitric acid, secondary pollutants, your particulate matters, nitrogen dioxide or peroxyacyl nitrates. So remember that as per the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, that is CREA, when this sulfur dioxide, right, is rising in the air and it gets into reaction with ammonium, that is NH3, it basically creates almost 1/3 or 33% of the particulate 2.5 meter. So the nationwide concentration of this ammonium sulfate, which has been created, why? Because of the reaction of sulfur dioxide and ammonia. Sulfur oxide was a primary pollutant, risen further and above, got reaction with ammonium, created what? Ammonium sulfate. Ammonium sulfate is now what? A secondary pollutant, as you guys can see from the research here also, right? That amounts to 11.9 microgram per meter cube concentration in the air around us, and that lead to almost 34% of the particulate matter 2.5 mass. Keep this in mind that almost 60% of this primary pollutant, that is sulfur oxide, that is actually produced, right? 60% of that is produced by these thermal power plants which you guys can see. The article further says that India's emission have kind of spiked significantly due to rapid socio-economic changes which has taken place. So obviously, let's say for example, if there is a huge heat wave which is prevailing, and for that purpose, right, people are basically installing what? Installing air conditions in your house, refrigerators in your house. So now when you people can afford that and install that, don't you think the energy consumption demand is also increasing? What if the majority of the energy supply in our country actually comes from these thermal power plants? So don't you think the heavy coal reliance and socio-economic changes will lead to what? Further spiking of what? Sulfur dioxide, as you guys can see from here. The report has suggested that India can reduce almost annual PM 2.5 level by 0.3 to 12 micrograms per cubic meter by just cutting down these coal-fired thermal power plants. And for that purpose, it basically suggests for a technique that is called as flue gas desulfurization, which is something which we will decode in detail. Now, when we are saying that this creation of particulate matters like 2.5 and 10, which is very easily inhalable by us, right? It actually leads to various cardiovascular diseases. What is the amount of the pollution which is prevailing? Because the study is based on Delhi, let's try to take Delhi as an example. So as per the World Health Organization report of 2024, keep this in mind, India has been listed as the third most polluted country in the world, with our dear capital being the world's most polluted capital city, where as per the report, 96% of the population which is living in the national capital territory, it is exposed to high level of particulate matter 2.5. And as per the Lancet report of 2023, the air pollution was the cause of 11% death which occurred per annum in the national capital. What is the extent of it? Just look at the World Health Organization's calculation, right, which was done just right before the last year's Diwali, according to which the 24-hour guideline for particulate matter 10 is 50 microgram per meter cube. The Delhi's reading on one night before the Diwali was actually 16 times higher than that. So that is the high level of the concentration of the particulate matter which we are facing. And 33% of that particulate matter is coming from what? This sulfur oxide. The sulfur oxide, 60% of which is actually being produced by these thermal power plants. Look at this KRIA report of 2024. So what is our reliance? What is our reliance for energy production when it comes to thermal power plants? Let's try to assess that as well. So the total installed power capacity which we have in our country is 456 gigawatt. Keep this in mind, we are using the data which has been provided to us by the Center of Electricity Authority, and this data basically dates back to the June of 2025. So at that point of a time, the total installed power capacity was 456 gigawatt, out of which the coal-based thermal power plants had the installed capacity of 47%. But their share in the actual power generation, the total power generation which is being done in our country, the power which you people are using to charge your mobile, to charge your tab on which you are watching this lecture right now, or let's say for example even for the electric vehicles. So all this power generation which is being done, more than 2/3 of that actually comes from these thermal power plants. The thermal power plants which are responsible for 60% of the sulfur dioxide gas, a toxic gas with a pungent smell. And keep this in mind, our country holds the title of the largest emitter of sulfur dioxide in the world. What happens then? This basically primary pollutant, sulfur dioxide, ends up rising in the air, combines with ammonia, and ends up creating or further kind of divides into the various kind of particulate matter. These thermal power plants have 240 times greater potential than the stubble burning which takes place, and thus this whole issue arises in the month of November and December, and you guys might be aware about that suddenly the air quality starts deteriorating very significantly in the region of Delhi, and for few months we start acting like an aware citizen, right? And we start criticizing the government that why the air pollution is not being controlled, and the majority of the blame is actually kind of put upon the farmers who indulge in this practice of stubble burning or kind of burning of the organic residue. However, keep this in mind that as per the study of KRIA itself, almost 20% of Delhi's air pollution actually comes from the generation of thermal power plants, right? The smoke which is released by these thermal power plants. Keep this in mind. And what is the impact of this SO2 emission? So these coal-based thermal power plants are basically generating almost 4 to 5 million tons of SO2 annually. The thermal power plants around Delhi itself amounts for 281 kilotons of sulfur dioxide emission. Many thermal power plants, as per the study which has been done by IIT Delhi, they actually entirely lack any kind of flue gas desulfurization technology which is being suggested by this study. So the study says that, let's say for example, if there is a thermal power plant, on the exhaust of it, where the smoke is about to release in the air, if we install flue gas desulfurization technology, then we can actually lead to the complete mitigation of SO2, will actually end up preventing 14,000 plus cardiovascular death. And it is actually going to be much more beneficial for the socio-economically disadvantaged group, which will actually see the highest health benefit. And the key word here is it will actually lead to the establishment of environmental equity. Also, this particular installation of FGD actually becomes much more important for us in the case, because don't you think our energy demand is further going to significantly increase in the upcoming time? Just look here, India's share of global energy demand is actually going to increase to 9% in the next decade. And the coal is going to remain the dominant fuel produced in India with a 65% share of total production in 2035. This is a report which was called as BP Energy Outlook, which was published in the year of 2025. Obviously, the highest increased demand is from China, second is USA, but the third is India. Then, as the global warming is taking place, right? So, as per your World Meteorological Organization, the global temperature has already increased by 1.4 degrees Celsius. So, further intensification of heat wave is going to take place, something which you people are witnessing around you as well. Thus, more need of refrigeration, more need of your installation of air conditioner, and thus don't you think that the power consumption and the demand is significantly going to rise up? Just look here, in the year of 23-24 itself, we actually faced a 4.47% of production deficit when it came to energy. Thus, it's very obvious that we cannot very easily switch to renewable energy projects. They require long gestation period, large scale capital investment in the initial few years, right? So there is a large scale capital cost which is also required. In comparison to that, it is very much easier to burn fossil fuels like coal, for example. And when the energy demand is actually significantly increasing, and there is a deficit of energy, which we are facing, shortage of energy. So what we will do, we'll start producing more and more energy from what? From these thermal power plants, leading to what? Further emission of sulfur dioxide. That's what the report suggests. The report suggests that we shall actually focus upon installing this flue gas desulfurization on thermal power plants. The government had already taken cognizance of it almost a decade back and had launched a thermal power plants policy of 2015. Under which the government ended up identifying that there existed 537 thermal power plants in our country. The government basically divided these thermal power plants into three categories and said that it is going to be mandatory for them to install this flue gas desulfurization on their exhaust or chimneys to make sure that the release of sulfur dioxide as a primary pollutant does not take place. First, let's try to understand how this flue gas desulfurization technology work. So let's say, for example, this is the flue gas. Flue gas is basically any gas which is being released by any industry, which is using basically fossil fuel as a source. Okay? So what we do, the first step or the role comes of demister. Demister basically is spray, right? Various kind of liquids, water, or for example some non-harmful gases, which basically kind of settle down these heavy pollutant particles of sulfur dioxide. And when this settle down, here we have created a kind of a mixture of limestone slurry, gypsum, oxidizing gas, and that basically completely dissolve this sulfur dioxide. Thus the gas which eventually comes out from this chimney or exhaust is actually a clean gas. As per the estimation by the Center for Electricity Authority itself, if such flue gas desulfurization was done in all these 537 thermal power plants, it would have led to the emission of SO2 from these industries almost by 95% reduction. Just imagine. So that was the idea. What were the three categories? First categories, any thermal power plants which lies within the 10-kilometer radius of the national capital region, or there is a thermal power plant functioning in a city, the city which has a population of more than 1 million. Here the government said that you are compulsorily required to install such flue gas desulfurization units on your exhaust by the date of 31st of December 2024. Then category B, the thermal power plant which is within a 10-kilometer radius of critically polluted areas or any non-attainment cities. You are required to do it by the year of 2026. Category C, any remaining thermal power plant throughout the country, they had given the deadline of 2027. The idea was that let's say there is a Vindhyachal thermal power plant which has the largest capacity, right, installed capacity in our country. For that, and it is also within 10 km of Delhi, then that particular thermal power plant had to install it by 31st of December 2024. If it does not install, right, 180 days or 6 months beyond 31st of December 2024, then the government was going to impose a penalty of 0.2 rupees per unit. If the delay is more than a year, 0.3 rupees per unit. If it is beyond 1 year, right, then it is going to be 0.4 rupees per unit. Now you guys might be saying that, sir, these are such an abysmal amount, right? Why these industries will take the cognizance of it? Let's say the production capacity of this Vindhyachal thermal power plant is 500 megawatt of energy, and it has not installed flue gas desulfurization unit for more than a year. Then it is going to be imposed a penalty of 0.4 rupees per unit. In that case, the total amount which Vindhyachal thermal power plant would have required to pay to the government was only 80 crore rupees. So don't you think it would have acted as a kind of a dent on their balance sheet, right? So obviously, to save this cost, it is much cheaper to install this FGD units on all of their exhaust. However, keep this in mind that it do require a kind of a large scale capital investment, and thus till the year of 2025, the month of December, only 39 out of 537 thermal power plant had actually installed these FGD units, which is a meager 8%. 8% of TPPs eventually installed these FGDs, right? So basically, it has not got that much of a traction among the industries, among the thermal power plants. Why? Why this issue arises? What is the issue with the installation of FGD? So as per the Central Electricity Authority review report itself, it basically found out that, let's say for example, if we are using all of these FGD units, and we are also making them run right on various amount of energy, and we are using various kind of gases, limestone slurry, etc. So for actually 1 mole, for the absorption of 1 mole of sulfur dioxide, we end up releasing a 1 mole of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas that will eventually lead to what? Further global warming. Then, as for the Council of Scientific and Engineering Research, there exists a lack of coordination between the Ministry of Power, the Ministry of Environment and thermal power plants to actually install these FGD at a kind of a prerequisite deadline which has been given to them. The thermal power plants started saying that, why will produce energy? We are not going to produce energy. To install this FGD on all of our exhaust, it is going to take a long gestation period. There is going to take place a high installation cost. The government also took the cognizance of it, keep this in mind. So these dates were now further increased, 24 to 26, 26 to 2028, 2027 to 2029. So obviously there is a kind of an extension of deadline which has been given to them. Then what happened? Then all of these, let's say for example, these 39 out of 537 thermal power plants, they said that, but we have already installed. Why you did not told us before? So these thermal power plants actually started incurring the cost which they had invested in the installation of these FGDs from the customer itself. So basically now they are not using those FGD because the government has extended the deadline. So all of that kind of removal of SO2 is not taking place. But because they have installed the FGD, they are charging that price from you, from the customer. So you as a customer is now paying for the installed but unused flue gas desulfurization unit. And for that purpose, there exists no accountability at all, either of Central Pollution Control Board or State Pollution Control Board. So many experts have actually, kind of commented that why government did not, kind of bore the cost of these FGD units. It would have led to, let's say, even 50% of incentivization or 50% of subsidy. So there would have been, kind of a public-private partnership would have been created. That would have further incentivized the other thermal power plants to actually install these FGD units. The government is saying that, see, we are already, kind of taken various other steps. And for that purpose, we have, kind of, not indulged into the investments of these FGD units. Then various government research bodies itself has questioned the installation of FGD units. For example, the CSIR NIRI study, it recommended against the installation of these FGD units. It said that SO2 emission norms are not important to actually maintain the good ambient air quality, obviously ignoring that how this SO2 emission leads to the 33% creation of particulate matters in India's air, and rather we should focus on reducing directly the particulate emission. The report also said that in Indian coal, which we are using to generate energy or which is being utilized in the thermal power plants, they actually have lower sulfur content. So tension लेने की जरूरत ही नहीं है. ठीक, government is saying, look at the other initiatives. We have launched a national clean air program where we are further, trying to reduce particulate matter, 40% reduction in that by 25-26 from 2017 level. We are covering 102 cities.
131 cities will be ranked on the action to reduce air pollution, right? City-specific air pollution abatement action plans will be created. We are bringing support from international agencies like World Bank, Swiss Development Corporation, etc. Then we are actually trying to reduce down the vehicular emission which we were discussing about from the automobile which runs on diesel and petrol. For that purpose, we have brought sustainable alternative towards affordable travel, as well as FAME scheme where we are basically promoting electric vehicles. We have completely banned the use of pet coke and furnace oil as a fuel in the region of National Capital Territory. The emissions should not take place from the stubble burning of the various organic residue of the crop. For that purpose, we have brought technical interventions like Happy Seeder. Even in the festival time, we are promoting what green crackers like Swas, Star, Safal, etc. So obviously, the flue gas desulfurization unit installation which is being suggested by the IT study, there is already a policy which exists for that. But because of the lack of public-private partnership and the kind of the resentment which has been shown by the private corporations, the large-scale installation of that has not been achieved. That is the issue. Try to attempt this question and we move forward to the next news, where we'll try to assess two important concepts from the perspective of prelims examination. First is, what if a chief minister of a state, right, who is currently serving as a chief minister but has lost election in the recent election which has taken place, and what if that person refuses that I will not leave the seat itself? Take. The second issue is that what if after the election there is no single political party which has enough majority to form the government in the state? In these two cases, what are the constitutional remedies or the directives which has been given by several commissions or Supreme Court? So what is the context of the news? A day after the Trinamool Congress lost the West Bengal elections to the BJP, the party chairperson Mamata Banerjee said that she will not resign as a chief minister. Why? Because alleging that the verdict was the result of a conspiracy rather than the people's mandate. She said that the elections had not been conducted fairly and accused the BJP of misusing the central forces to forcibly capture the booths and influence the outcome. So the gist of the article basically tells us that though Article 164 very explicitly states that the Council of Ministers hold the office during the pleasure of the governor, this is not absolute in practice. A chief minister can continue only so as long as they enjoy the confidence of the Legislative Assembly. The majority of a chief minister is determined through a floor test in the House, and if they fail to prove the support, they must resign. Just a different case has taken place in Tamil Nadu, where for the first time in the history of Tamil Nadu, it has taken place a case of a hung assembly. What is a hung assembly? So let's say what happened in Tamil Nadu, that the total number of seats which are there in the Legislative Assembly is 234. The largest party which has won the majority of the seat is the TVK of Vijay, right, which has ended up winning 108 seats. So it basically requires, right, to form the government, the majority which is required is 118 seats. So it has basically fall down 10 seats, right, to basically create the government. So hung assembly is a case where after the election, no single political party or no pre-poll alliance-based party, the alliance of parties, has secured a significant majority to form the government. That is the issue which is termed as hung assembly. Now, what is the procedure in this case? What takes place if there is a hung assembly? So, what are the constitutional directives in the front of the governor? The governor which ultimately calls the political party, the head of the political party, to form the government, as the Tamil Nadu governor did in the case of Vijay. First is Article 163, Clause 1, which says that there shall be a council of ministers, right, with the chief minister at the head to aid and advise the governor in the exercise of function. Now remember, unlike the case of president, there is a constitutional discretion which has been provided to the governor by the provisions of constitution itself. That is absent in the case of president, right? Except insofar as he is by or under this constitution is required to exercise his functions or any of them in his discretion. So for example, under Article 365 of the Constitution, there is a very specific directive that if there is a failure of constitutional machinery which has taken place in the state, the governor will aid and advise to the president to impose what? Precedent rule in the state, right? Second, let's say for example, if there is any bill which has been passed by the state legislative assembly and that in any way compromises the position of High Court in the state, then also the governor has a constitutional discretion, right? A question which appeared in your prelims 2025. Article 163 clause 2 says, if any question arises, right, that whether any discretion which governor has taken, any matter is or is not a matter under which the governor is required to act in his discretion, then the decision of the governor in his discretion is going to be final. Keep this in mind. And validity of anything done by the governor under these discretionary provision provided to him by the constitution shall not be called in the question, right? Shall not be called in any court. Article 164 clause 1 says that the chief minister shall be appointed by the governor and the other ministers shall be appointed by the governor on the advice of the chief minister. But at what time? Let's say for example, if the election result has been announced. After that, how much specific time shall be taken? When the government creation shall be done by the governor? No such timing has been provided. Article 164 clause 2 says that the council of ministers shall be collectively responsible to the legislative assembly of the state. It requires the house to be not to be against the government. So in this case, let's say for example, if the TVK headed by Vijay says that I am claiming the majority, I have enough number of people, 118 seats, I am going to create the government, then this claim will go through the floor test under the provision of Article 164 clause 2, where he will have to ensure that the house is not against the government. So it is coming from this collective responsibility to the legislative assembly. Article 164 clause 3 says that before a minister enter upon his office, the governor has a duty that he shall administer to him the oath of office and of secrecy under which schedule, third schedule of the constitution. Article 174 specifically says that the governor is required from time to summon the legislative assembly at any time and place when he wants, but 6 months shall not intervene between its last sitting of the assembly in one session and the date appointed for its first sitting in the next session. So after the last session has been, prorogued by the governor, then the next session shall take place within the 6 months. That is the idea. So in the case of this hung assembly which takes place in Tamil Nadu, is there any procedure to be followed by the governor? Yes, indeed. And this procedure has been specifically laid by the Sarkaria Commission in the year of 1989. Sarkaria Commission which was appointed to actually, assess the center-state relation. Where it said that if there is a hung assembly, the procedure shall be. So first and foremost, the governor of Tamil Nadu is going to call an alliance of parties that was formed prior to the election. But no such alliance has got enough number of seats. Koi baat nahi. Second procedure. Single largest party, that is TVK, that is taking a claim to form the government with the support of other, including the independent. If Vijay fails to prove his majority that he has 118 seats, then a post-electoral coalition of the parties will be called. If even that is not going to be, be enough to prove the majority of 118 seats, then the last resort is a post-electoral alliance of parties with some of the parties who are in the alliance forming the government and the remaining parties, including independent, just supporting the government from the outside. And this procedure was upheld as a kind of a legal procedure by the Supreme Court in Rameshwari Prasad versus Union of India. Now, there is some other directive by S.R. Bommai, 1994. It said that the majority, right, whether the particular TVK has the majority of 118 seats to form the government or not, that shall be tested on the floor in the case the doubt still prevails and not in the Raj Bhavan. Thus, the governor's subjective satisfaction is very limited. Floor test must be held at the earliest practicable date. Keep this in mind. And Article 361 provides that the governor indeed has a personal immunity from being sued, as we read, but his action can be reviewed and that can be set aside by the court. So a kind of a judicial review to the actions of the governor has been provided under the S.R. Bommai case. What will happen in the case of Mamata Banerjee in Calcutta, in Bengal? Article 172 will come into play. It says that the assembly shall continue for 5 years from the date appointed for its first meeting. So let's say for example on 8th of May, 5 years back, right, the assembly of West Bengal was convened by the governor. So the dissolution period will last till 7th of May, that is today. After that, the new government has to be called by the governor of West Bengal. The expiration of said period of 5 years shall operate as the dissolution of assembly. फॉर्मल रेसिग्नेशन का ऐसा कोई स्पेसिफिक प्रोसीजर एग्जिस्ट नहीं करता है. फॉर्मल रेसिग्नेशन इज नथिंग बट अ मैटर ऑफ कन्वेंशन. कीप दिस इन माइंड. ठीक है. And we move forward to the next news, where we'll quickly try to assess the India's semiconductor mission, which has appeared in your explained section of Indian Express today. So what is the context of the news? The cabinet has approved 2 new semiconductor plants, including one that could be the country's first display fabrication facility, in a boost to India's chip making ambition. A display fabrication facility is what? A specialized, high investment, clean room environment designed to actually create the electronic screen for where you watch your matches of IPL or for where you are watching this lecture, such as LCD and OLED, by layering materials on glass semiconductor basis. So with this, the government has approved a total number of 12 chip plants under the first leg of its India's semiconductor mission, which is an ambitious 76,000 crore plan to actually kickstart manufacturing after managing to localize smartphone assembly. What are semiconductors? Semiconductors are those materials whose conductivity, right? Conductivity to, kind of passes the electrons. The properties of it lies between the conductor and the insulator, like for example, silicon, germanium, gallium, arsenide, etc. The 2 major functions which make semiconductor very attractive is that they have a very low operating voltage, thus do not require that much of energy consumption for its function, and less expensive than the conductors. Keep this in mind that the India semiconductor market is going to be valued up to $300 billion by the year of 2030. However, currently the entire semiconductor production which exists in our country, the indigenous production amounts to only 17% of that. 83% of semiconductors in our country are completely imported from the other countries, majorly from China. Just look here. Why this mission is important for our country? Like minerals, like bismuth, pharmaceutical and chemicals, right? Very important for the creation of that. 85% import dependency. For the creation of EV batteries, the lithium is required. We are 82% import dependent. For the creation of various semiconductor and solar panels, silicon is required. 76% import dependency is there. For various defense application, titanium is required. 50% import dependency. Vietnam has a rich resource of titanium. 42% import dependency lies in the case of tellurium, which we use in solar power and thermoelectric devices. Thus, we are basically now trying to focus upon the indigenous production of these semiconductor, the mission which has been launched under the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, which, keep this in mind, is a central sector scheme with a financial outlay of $10 billion or 76,000 crore rupees. Various such fabrication units are being created in the region of Gujarat as well as in the region of Telangana. The government has provided a kind of a fiscal incentive structure. So almost 50% of the project cost will be borne by the government in the case of semiconductor fabrication plants. 50% of the project cost in the case of display fabrication units, OSAT units, design linked incentive scheme as well. So there is a kind of up to 50% fiscal support which is being provided by the government for the indigenous manufacturing of various kind of semiconductor. For further, kind of increase and boost the semiconductor supply and the raw material supply to our country also joined Pax Silica. Pax Silica, which is a US-led initiative to actually counter the China's dominance in the critical minerals and semiconductor. Keep this in mind that it is not a formal or binding treaty. India, being the part of Quad, which also includes Japan and Australia along with USA, has joined Pax Silica. Other countries includes Netherlands, Singapore, South Korea, and keep this in mind that your Organization for Economic and Cooperation and Development, OECD, and European Union basically act as official observers of Pax Silica, where the major idea is to put impetus on China Plus One strategy to secure global technology and artificial intelligence based supply chains. So the other initiatives which has been launched by USA, like for example CHIPS Act, where it is subsidizing for semiconductor manufacturing, export restrictions on advanced AI chips, as well as the Chip 4 Alliance framework which it has launched with Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. Remember, India is part of Pax Silica, but India is not part of Chip 4 Alliance framework. Also, it is basically focusing on friend shoring strategy, where with the friendly nations of European Union, it is basically trying to import as much as semiconductor as well as critical minerals which it can. India has also launched production linked incentive scheme for semiconductors. Under Kabil initiative, we are basically trying to secure overseas mineral assets, like for example lithium triangle. Can anybody please comment down the countries which form the part of lithium triangle? Very strategic reason for our country. deep ocean mission for exploration of such minerals even within the Indian Ocean, in within our exclusive economic zone, which is provided under UN clause. So these are the initiative by USA, various initiatives which are in the news. This is your mission. Keep all of this factual information in your mind, and we move forward to the next news, where we'll quickly try to assess a very important act, that is Right of Person with Disabilities Act, which has featured in the news today. And what is the context of it? The context is a directive which has been given by the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court on Monday held that the person who were forced to consume acid and thus suffered internal injuries, which is not visible on any part of their body, without visible scars, would also be considered acid attack victims under the Right of Person with Disabilities Act 2016. The top court's ruling was necessitated by the fact that the Act's definition of acid attack victim appears to confine itself to the external disfigurement. Thus, the bench of CJI Suryakant and Justice Bagchi said that the clarification would apply retrospectively, that is, from the day of the Act came into the force. Who are these disabled people? So as per the United Nations Convention on Right of People with Disabilities, these disabled people, they basically form a invisible minority, where as per the definition which has been given to us by the World Health Organization, disabled person is a person who basically faces any kind of impairment, activity learning and participation restrictions to perform things or activities which are basically considered normal for other human beings. Why? As per UNCRPD, they are an invisible minority because there exist almost 1.3 billion such people who exist globally who are suffering from one or other kind of disability. We do not have any official data for it, but as per the Ministry of Social Justice reply in the Lok Sabha in 2024, there existed 2.68 crore people in our country who are facing some or other kind of disability. That was almost 2% of the population. Keep this in mind that 80% of such disabled people are actually found in the developing country, and almost 70% of them actually reside in rural areas. In our country, the people who are facing disability in movement are amounting to almost 54 lakh, and hearing and seeing amount to 50 lakh each. So as per the Right of Person with Disabilities Act, there already existed 21 such categories: the people who are facing blindness, leprosy cured person, locomotor disability, dwarfism, intellectual disability, mental illness, specific learning disability, hearing impairment, muscular dystrophy. Acid attack victims were listed, but now it will also include the people who have suffered internal injuries, and it will not confine itself to external disfigurement. Keep this in mind. The people who are facing Parkinson disease, thalassemia, hemophilia, sickle cell disease, right, autism spectrum disorder, etc. So what are the rights which has been provided to them? So first and foremost, under Article 40, the right to equality, accessibility and reasonable accommodation has been provided. Section 3 of the Act very specifically says that no person shall be discriminated on the ground of disability. Also, the under Right to Education Act 2009, normally it provides a free and fair education from the people of students or child of age from 6 to 14 years. But if you are a disabled, then such free education is provided from 6 to 18 years. If there is a person who has, let's say for example, humiliated any disabled person or has done any kind of crime against them, then there is a high penalty for any such serious offense, imprisonment up to 6 months to 5 years. For disposal of such cases, faster education is provided under creation of special courts, and a specific increased quota of reservation where such disabled people shall be provided 4% reservation in the government job and at least 5% reservation in the higher education. However, is this actually being reflected on the ground? As per the Hindu research, it does not. So despite the law raising reservation to 4% in the government job, their share in the government job have never crossed 1.1%. Just keep this in mind. The group A actually has the lowest share. The group B has a share of 1.53%, and the majority share actually comes in group C, that is Safai Karmachari. Even if you look at the 2025 result, right, the government very specifically told that how out of 1087 selections which were made, only 42 people with disabilities were actually selected, and that is actually less than 4%, as it is being guaranteed by the government. So the reflection does not exist on the ground. Even when we are talking about the acid attack victim, the Supreme Court has flagged an alarming increase in the number of acid attacks since 2030. According to the compliance affidavit filed in the top court, UP has the highest backlog of acid attack cases of 198, West Bengal has 160, Gujarat has 140. So keep this data and facts in your mind and you move forward to the next news, where we'll quickly learn about the very interesting 7 big cats and why they are in the news. Because the inaugural International Big Cat Alliance Summit for the first time is going to be held in New Delhi, and that is expected to adopt the first ever global declaration on the big cat conservation, titled as Delhi Declaration. It is going to articulate shared priorities, strengthen transboundary cooperation, and promote a landscape based approach for the conservation of the big cats and their habitats. Representatives from 95 countries are expected to participate as per the Ministry of Environment. First and foremost, which are these 7 big cats? Lion, tiger, leopard, snow leopard, pumas, jaguars, and cheetahs. And for the preservation of them, the International Big Cat Alliance was launched by our country. The inaugural summit is also being hosted by our country in New Delhi in the year of 2023. So the headquarter of this International Big Cat Alliance is where? In New Delhi, and the member countries are 96. The government of India under the Ministry of Environment is providing a funding of almost $100 million. Keep this in mind. So these are your 7 big cats. These are their listing in the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Keep this in mind. Tiger, lion, cheetah, leopard, and snow leopard, all of them are listed under Schedule 1, while jaguar and puma do not find their listing in the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Your tiger is considered as endangered. Your cheetah, if you are talking about the global cheetah, then IUCN status is vulnerable, but Indian cheetah or Asiatic cheetah is actually listed as critically endangered. Lion is vulnerable, leopard is, so is snow leopard. Jaguar is listed as near threatened, while puma is of the least concerned nature. In the sites, keep this in mind, all of them basically falls in the category of Appendix 1. Very specifically about the Asiatic lions, right? Because some very interesting questions can appear in the prelims examination. Because see, whenever we hear the terms like only, so some YouTube experts has come and they have told you that whenever there is a only, you will basically end up eliminating that statement. And thus you people have become only phobic in your life. But let's say UPSC gives you a statement. Asiatic lions are listed as endangered on IUCN. Nahi. Asiatic lion is found only in India. Yes. In India, they are found only in the Gir National Park of Gujarat. Yes. And Appendix 1 of Sites and Schedule 1 of Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Just keep these facts in your mind and we move forward to the next news, where we'll quickly learn about a new virus which has actually appeared in the news. What is the context? So a group of people on a Dutch cruise ship was actually found to be infected by a deadly Hantavirus. 7 cases of such, 2 laboratory confirmed and 5 suspected, has been identified among the 147 passengers and crew which were actually on board a ship called as MV Hondius. 3 of them have died while 1 is seriously ill. So yes, obviously the fatality rate of this virus do exist. Keep this in mind that this vessel is currently stationed where? At the Cape Verde Island of the coast of West Africa. Okay? A location for your map also. What is this Hantavirus which is actually named upon? Hantan River in South Korea. It is basically a rodent borne virus. You guys can see this rodent and thus remember the name of this rodent is Hanta. Okay? That can cause serious illness and death in human. Right? How it is spread? Contact with infected rodents or their urine, dropping or saliva. Keep this in mind that Hantavirus, right, there is a kind of a specific syndrome which specifically leads to various kind of severe respiratory illness such as Hantavirus cardiopulmonary syndrome, which has a fatality rate up to 50%, and that is why it is considered to be more serious in rather than the COVID pandemic, right? And there is a specific kind of a transition or the variant of this virus called as Andevirus, which is specifically found in the region of South America, that is known for human to human transmission as well, which is indeed a possibility. So how it is actually spread? The virus is often carried by the rodents. The particles from infected droppings and urines can become airborne. The infection occurs when those particles are inhaled. It can cause severe illness leading to lung damage, internal bleeding as well as the kidney failure, right? Keep this in mind. No vaccine or antiviral treatment exists for the treatment of your Hantavirus as of now, as per the World Health Organization. And with this, we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation and thank you.